I'm Cassandra Reynolds, 28 years old, and my sister Stephanie, and I never had the relationship sisters should have. The day she wrapped that extension cord around my neck, something inside her finally snapped completely. I still remember gasping for air, feeling my consciousness fade as her grip tightened. Everyone thought Stephanie was perfect, smart, beautiful, accomplished. Nobody saw the darkness until it was almost too late. When those X-rays appeared in court, even she couldn't hold back her tears. If you're watching this, where are you from? Hit that like button and subscribe to hear how family jealousy spiraled into a nightmare that almost cost me my life. Growing up in Minneapolis with Stephanie was like living in the shadow of a supernova. From as early as I can remember, my sister, 3 years my senior, commanded attention in every room she entered. Our parents, Megan and Daniel Reynolds, were both successful professionals, Dad a corporate attorney whose name adorned the letterhead of one of the city's most prestigious firms, and Mom a pediatrician beloved by her patients. They provided us with a beautiful suburban home, complete with a sprawling backyard where neighborhood kids would gather for barbecues and pool parties during Minnesota's brief, but glorious summers. On paper, we had the perfect American family. In reality, the dynamics were far more complicated. Stephanie was the quintessential golden child, blessed with natural beauty, athletic prowess, and a mind that seemed to absorb information effortlessly. She maintained a perfect 4.0 GPA throughout her academic career, captained the volleyball team, and was crowned homecoming queen. Parents of her friends would often tell my mother how lucky she was to have such a perfect daughter. I, on the other hand, was different. While not unsuccessful, my achievements paled in comparison. Where Stephanie excelled in mathematics and science, I struggled with formulas, but found my voice in creative writing and art. My report cards were dotted with BS and the occasional C, which in our household might as well have been failing grades. I was more introverted, preferring the company of a few close friends rather than the adoring entourage that surrounded my sister. The first time I noticed something was wrong, I was 7 years old. I had spent weeks working on a papier-mâché solar system for the science fair, carefully painting each planet with the colors and patterns I'd memorized from my astronomy book. The night before the fair, I left it to dry in the garage. The next morning, I discovered Jupiter and Saturn had been crushed, as if someone had deliberately pressed their thumb through the delicate paper shells. When I tearfully showed my mother, Stephanie appeared, concern etched on her face, suggesting that maybe our cat had gotten into the garage. We didn't own a cat. In 4th grade, I created an elaborate watercolor painting of our family for an art contest. My teacher was so impressed that she asked to keep it displayed for Parents' Night. The evening before the event, Stephanie told me she'd seen another student handling my artwork. When we arrived at school, the painting had water spilled across it, rendering it unrecognizable. 2 weeks later, I discovered a nearly identical painting hidden in Stephanie's desk drawer when I was looking for a borrowed sweater. When I confronted her, she convinced our parents I was lying out of jealousy. These incidents formed a pattern throughout our childhood. My homework would mysteriously disappear the night before it was due. If I received praise for something, Stephanie would suddenly develop an interest in the same activity and inevitably excel at it. When I was 12, I received a beautiful journal for Christmas from our grandmother, my first grown-up gift. I found it a week later, its spine broken and pages ripped out. Stephanie suggested our golden retriever, Max, must have gotten hold of it, though Max had never destroyed anything in his 7 years with our family. The most painful aspect wasn't the acts themselves, but my parents' reactions. No matter how implausible Stephanie's explanations, they accepted them without question. "Your sister would never do something like that," became a refrain I heard countless times. When I tried to defend myself, my mother would sigh and say, "Cassie, you need to stop blaming others for accidents." My father, when present for these conversations, would add, "Stephanie has always been responsible. Try to learn from her example." Family dinners became exercises in endurance. My parents would gush over Stephanie's latest accomplishment, a debate tournament victory, another A+ on a difficult exam, praise from her piano teacher, while my own small victories went unnoticed or were quickly glossed over. Holiday gatherings with extended family weren't much better. Relatives would fawn over Stephanie while I sat quietly, feeling increasingly invisible. The pattern continued into high school. While Stephanie was elected student body president and received early acceptance to an Ivy League university, I found my own niche in the school newspaper and art club. I made genuine friends who appreciated my creativity and sense of humor, qualities my family rarely acknowledged. I dated a few boys who saw past my sister's blinding aura to the person I actually was. My high school graduation should have been a day of celebration. I had been selected to create the artwork for the ceremony program, a detailed pen and ink drawing of our school that the principal had specifically commissioned. As family and friends gathered at our house afterward, Stephanie, home from her freshman year at university, arrived late to the party. She entered dramatically, announcing she'd just received notice of her acceptance into a prestigious summer medical research program. My parents immediately shifted their focus, congratulating her and calling relatives to share the news. My graduation party became Stephanie's celebration, and as I watched her accepting congratulations that should have been mine, I caught her glancing my way with the faintest smile of satisfaction. That night, as guests departed, my father patted my shoulder and said, "Good job finishing high school, Cassie. Maybe someday you'll find your calling like your sister has." I smiled politely, but inside, something hardened. I promised myself that whatever path I chose in life, it would be one where I wouldn't have to compete with Stephanie's shadow. The divergence in our paths became more pronounced as we entered adulthood. While Stephanie headed east to her prestigious university with a pre-med focus, I chose to attend the state college just an hour from Minneapolis. My decision wasn't solely financial, though the substantial scholarship I'd received for my portfolio certainly helped, but also practical. I'd discovered a passion for graphic design and digital arts, and the program at State had an excellent reputation in the industry. Those 4 years gave me the breathing room I desperately needed. Away from Stephanie's overwhelming presence and my parents' unbalanced expectations, I flourished. My professors recognized my talent, and I built a portfolio that landed me multiple internship offers. By junior year, I was working part-time at a growing digital marketing agency called Horizon Creative, where my designs for a local brewery's rebranding campaign won a regional advertising award. Meanwhile, Stephanie's perfect trajectory hit unexpected turbulence. Despite her intelligence and academic pedigree, medical school proved challenging in ways she hadn't anticipated. For perhaps the first time in her life, she wasn't automatically the star student. Her letters and phone calls home became less frequent, and when she did communicate, she glossed over her struggles, focusing instead on campus social events and connections she was making. During my senior year, I met Jason Walker in a user experience design course. He was a business major taking the class as an elective, and we were paired for a semester-long project. Tall with kind brown eyes and an easy laugh, Jason was confident without being arrogant, a quality I found immediately attractive. Our project meetings gradually evolved into coffee dates, then dinner dates, and by graduation, we were inseparable. Jason accepted a position with a financial services firm in Minneapolis, and I was offered a full-time role at Horizon Creative. When Stephanie came home for Christmas during her second year of medical school, the dynamics had shifted slightly. I arrived at our parents' house with Jason, whose warmth and genuine interest in everyone made him an instant hit with my father. My mother served her traditional holiday dinner, and as we sat around the table, the conversation naturally turned to our respective accomplishments. Cassandra's campaign for the Minneapolis Symphony was featured in Communication Arts magazine, Jason mentioned proudly, reaching for my hand under the table. My father looked up with surprise. "Is that important in your field?" Before I could answer, Jason continued, "It's one of the most prestigious publications in design. Less than 2% of submitted work gets selected." "Well," my mother said with a quick smile, "that's nice. Stephanie, tell us about your cardiology rotation." Stephanie launched into a story about assisting with a diagnostic procedure, but I noticed something different in her expression when she glanced my way, a flicker of something beyond her usual condescension. Later, as I helped clear the table, she cornered me in the kitchen. "So things seem to be going well for you," she said, her tone casual, but her eyes sharp. Though I imagine drawing pictures all day isn't particularly challenging compared to diagnosing heart conditions. "We all have different talents," I replied, determined not to be baited. "And different standards, apparently," she murmured, looking pointedly toward the dining room where Jason was engaged in conversation with our father. "Though I suppose he's suitable for someone with your aspirations." These interactions became the new normal. Stephanie's visits home were infrequent but tense. She'd arrive with stories of medical school challenges that were framed as noble struggles rather than difficulties, while making subtle digs at my career choice and relationship. Our parents remained largely blind to the dynamics, though I occasionally caught my father watching us with a puzzled expression. As we moved deeper into our 20s, the contrast between our lives grew more pronounced. I advanced quickly at Horizon, moving from designer to senior designer within 2 years. Jason and I moved in together, creating a cozy apartment that reflected our shared aesthetic. We traveled when we could, taking weekend trips to Chicago or Denver, posting photos of our adventures that received enthusiastic responses from friends. Stephanie's path proved more complicated. She took a leave of absence from medical school, citing exhaustion, though rumors reached us through family friends that she'd failed several important exams. When she returned to her program, she switched from surgery to psychiatry, a move she described as following my true calling, but which my mother privately lamented as settling. Her personal life seemed equally tumultuous. She dated a series of men: a fellow medical student, a pharmaceutical representative, a radiology technician, but the relationships inevitably imploded within months. After each breakup, she would call our mother late at night for hours-long conversations that left Mom drained and worried. When I was 26, Horizon's creative director left for a position in New York, and to everyone's surprise, including my own, I was tapped to fill the role. The promotion came with a substantial salary increase, new responsibilities, and a team of 8 designers reporting to me. Jason took me out to celebrate at Minneapolis's finest restaurant, and halfway through dessert, he knelt beside our table and presented a vintage sapphire ring that had belonged to his grandmother. The news of both my promotion and engagement was met with mixed reactions from my family. My father, who had gradually developed more respect for my career as he saw its financial rewards, offered genuine congratulations. My mother expressed happiness tinged with concern about wedding planning logistics. Stephanie, who was between relationships and struggling with her psychiatric residency, responded to my excited phone call with a chilly, "Well, I guess some people prioritize their personal lives over professional achievement." The Thanksgiving following my engagement was particularly tense. Stephanie arrived late, bringing an expensive bottle of wine but no significant other. As we gathered around the table, she drank steadily through dinner, becoming increasingly sharp-tongued. When my mother asked about preliminary wedding plans, Stephanie interrupted my response. "I'm sure it will be very creative," she said, swirling her 3rd glass of Cabernet. "Though I wonder if Jason realizes what he's signing up for with his family. Medical issues can be hereditary, you know." "What does that mean?" Jason asked, his normally easygoing demeanor stiffening. Stephanie smiled. "Nothing specific. Just that families can be complicated. Right, Cassie?" That night marked a turning point. On the drive home, Jason expressed what I had felt for years, but never fully articulated. "Your sister isn't just competitive with you," he said quietly. "She actively wants to see you unhappy." Though part of me wanted to defend Stephanie, a reflex born from years of family conditioning, I couldn't deny the truth in his words. Something in my sister went beyond normal sibling rivalry. The realization was both frightening and, in a strange way, liberating. For the first time, I allowed myself to acknowledge that the problem wasn't my perception, it was Stephanie's reality. By the spring of the following year, Jason and I had saved enough for a down payment on a modest but charming craftsman-style home in a developing neighborhood of Minneapolis. The three-bedroom house needed cosmetic updates, but had good bones, a backyard perfect for our future plans, and most importantly, it was ours. The day we signed the closing papers, I felt a sense of achievement that went beyond any professional recognition I'd received. My parents, particularly my father, were impressed with our investment and offered to host a housewarming party. Nothing too elaborate, my mother assured me over the phone, just family and a few close friends to christen the new place. I agreed, touched by the gesture and hoping it signaled a new chapter in our family dynamics. I spent the weeks before the party painting accent walls, hanging artwork, and adding personal touches that transformed the house into our home. Jason built a deck off the kitchen where we placed a grill and outdoor furniture, perfect for the early summer gathering. The day of the housewarming arrived with ideal weather, sunshine, blue skies, and a gentle breeze. Guests began arriving at 4, bearing plants, bottles of wine, and small household gifts. My parents appeared with a handsome check for whatever the house needs most, and a vintage crystal vase that had belonged to my grandmother. Stephanie arrived an hour late, dressed impeccably in a designer dress that seemed excessive for a casual backyard gathering. She presented us with an expensive Italian espresso machine, a gesture that might have seemed generous if not for her comment, "I thought you might appreciate having something sophisticated in the house." She then proceeded to dominate conversations, name-dropping colleagues and mentioning research papers she was contributing to. What struck me most, however, was how often her gaze followed me around the party. Whenever I received a compliment or shared a laugh with guests, her expression would tighten almost imperceptibly. She stationed herself near the bar we had set up, refilling her wine glass frequently as the afternoon progressed into evening. As twilight descended, I overheard a conversation between my parents and my boss, who had been invited with his wife. They were standing near the hydrangea bushes at the edge of the yard, partially obscured but within earshot. "You must be very proud of Cassandra," my boss was saying. "Her leadership has transformed our creative department. We're attracting clients we couldn't have approached 2 years ago." My father's response caught me by surprise. "We are proud. She's carved out her own path, stuck with it. To be honest, I didn't always understand her career choice, but she's proved me wrong." "Both our girls are exceptional in their ways," my mother added, though I noticed she glanced toward Stephanie, who was now engaged in what appeared to be an intense conversation with Jason's cousin. From my vantage point near the kitchen door, I saw Stephanie stiffen, her posture becoming rigid as she undoubtedly heard the exchange as well. She excused herself from her conversation and moved to refill her glass again, sloshing wine onto the outdoor bar as she poured. By 9 o'clock, most guests had departed, offering final congratulations and compliments on the home. My parents, citing an early meeting my father had the following day, hugged us goodbye with promises to call later in the week. Jason's parents had left earlier to relieve their babysitter. "We should head out too," Jason's cousin said, glancing at his wife who nodded in agreement. "Early start tomorrow." This left just Jason and me, and Stephanie, who showed no signs of leaving. She had moved from wine to the scotch my father had brought, and was lounging on our new sofa as if settling in for the night. "I can help clean up," she offered, her words slightly slurred, but her eyes surprisingly alert. Jason glanced at me uncertainly. "I'll take care of the yard stuff," he said, gathering empty plates and cups from the outdoor tables. "Probably take a few trips to the trash bins outside." As he disappeared through the side gate with the first load of garbage, Stephanie rose from the sofa and followed me into the kitchen where I was loading the dishwasher. For a moment, she simply watched me work, leaning against the counter with her tumbler of scotch. "Nice little house," she finally said. "Cozy. Quaint, even." "Thanks," I replied, choosing to take her words at face value. "We love it." "Must be nice," she continued, swirling the amber liquid in her glass. "Playing house with Jason. Your cute little job. Everything falling into place." I placed a stack of plates in the dishwasher, trying to maintain the peace. "We've worked hard for this, Steph." She laughed, a sound devoid of humor. "Worked hard? You draw pictures for a living, Cassandra." You fell into a job right out of college because they needed someone cheap, and now you've convinced everyone you're some kind of creative genius. The sudden venom in her voice made me straighten up and face her directly. That's not fair. Or true. Nothing's ever been fair, she said, her voice dropping to a near whisper. Do you know what it's like? Watching you coast through life, taking shortcuts, getting everything handed to you. Handed to me? I couldn't keep the incredulity from my voice. Are we living in the same reality? You were always the star, the favorite. Mom and Dad could barely see me past your spotlight. Poor little Cassie, she mocked, placing her glass on the counter with a sharp click. Always the victim. You have no idea what real pressure's like. What real expectations feel like. You fail, and it's just Cassie being Cassie. I slip even slightly, and it's a family crisis. She stepped closer, and I noticed something change in her eyes, a emptiness replacing the usual calculation, as if something had switched off inside her. On the counter between us lay an extension cord we'd used earlier to connect the outdoor speakers, its orange length coiled like a snake. You've always had it so easy, she continued, her voice strangely flat now. Everything I worked for, you get without trying. The attention. The praise. The perfect fiancé. The dream home. Her hand moved to the extension cord, fingers trailing along its plastic surface. You don't deserve any of it. Stephanie, I said, suddenly uneasy, I think you've had too much to drink. Maybe I should call you a cab. The movement happened so quickly I had no time to react. In one fluid motion, she grabbed the cord, lunged forward, and looped it around my neck. I felt the hard plastic dig into my skin as she pulled backward, using her weight to tighten the improvised garrote. Always taking what should be mine, she hissed into my ear as I clawed desperately at the cord. I couldn't scream, couldn't make any sound beyond a strangled gasp. My nails scraped against the cord and then against my own skin as I tried to create space to breathe. Black spots danced in my vision as I fought to stay conscious, lungs burning with the need for oxygen. My knees buckled, but Stephanie maintained her grip, pulling me backward against her body as she continued to tighten the cord. In my fading awareness, I heard the side door slam open. Cassandra, do you want me to? Jason's voice cut off abruptly. Then a shout, what the fuck? Stephanie, stop. The pressure around my neck increased for one more terrible moment, Stephanie's final defiance, before Jason's hands were there, prying her away, unwinding the cord from my throat. I collapsed to the kitchen floor, gulping air in painful, ragged breaths. Through watery eyes, I saw Stephanie backed against the refrigerator, her expression cycling rapidly between rage, confusion, and something like fear. Then, as Jason knelt beside me asking if I could breathe, if I could speak, Stephanie's face settled into a mask of wounded innocence. She attacked me first, she said, her voice suddenly small and shaking. I was just defending myself. You didn't see what happened before you came in. As consciousness fully returned, along with the searing pain in my throat, I realized with perfect clarity that my sister had just tried to kill me. The fluorescent hospital lights were the first thing I registered when I opened my eyes. A steady beeping sound came from somewhere to my right, and my throat felt as though I'd swallowed broken glass. When I tried to turn my head, a sharp pain shot down my neck and into my shoulder. Don't try to move, Jason's voice was soft but strained. I found his face, noted the dark circles under his eyes, the stubble on his usually clean-shaven face. He leaned forward in the uncomfortable-looking chair he'd pulled up to my bedside. You're in the hospital. You're safe now. Safe. The word triggered a cascade of memories. Stephanie's face contorted with rage, the extension cord tightening around my neck, the desperate fight for air. I tried to speak but produced only a painful croak. Don't try to talk yet. Jason reached for a plastic cup of water with a straw. Small sips, the doctor said. The cool water provided minimal relief to my raw throat. As I became more fully aware, I noticed in my arm, monitors attached to my chest, and a large bandage around my neck. I raised my hand questioningly. You've been here about 14 hours, Jason explained, answering my unspoken question. They had to sedate you when we arrived because you were in shock and your airway was swelling. His voice cracked slightly. It was touch and go for a bit, but the doctors say you're going to be okay. A light knock at the door preceded the entrance of a middle-aged woman in a white coat, stethoscope draped around her neck. Ms. Reynolds? I'm Dr. Patel. Good to see you awake. How's the pain level on a scale of 1 to 10? I held up 7 fingers. I'll have the nurse bring something for that, she said, making a note on her tablet. We need to discuss your injuries before the police come back for their interview. Police. Of course there would be police. My sister had tried to kill me. Dr. Patel pulled up images on a wall-mounted screen. These are the x-rays we took when you were admitted. You have significant bruising to your trachea, your windpipe, she clarified, pointing to a shadowy area on the image. There's also trauma to your cervical vertebrae, particularly C3 and C4, from the force applied during the strangulation. She switched to another image. We were concerned about a potential fracture here. She indicated a spot on my upper spine, but it appears to be just severe bruising and inflammation. However, you do have extensive soft tissue damage and some concerning vascular compression. The blood vessels in your neck sustained pressure that could have led to stroke or worse. The clinical description of how close I'd come to death made the room seem to tilt slightly. Jason's hand found mine, squeezing gently. We'll keep you at least another day for observation, Dr. Patel continued. You'll need to rest your voice completely for several days, and you'll likely experience difficulty swallowing and speaking for several weeks. There may be lingering pain and stiffness in your neck for months. She paused, her expression softening slightly. I've also requested a consultation with one of our staff psychologists. Trauma like this has emotional impacts that need addressing alongside the physical recovery. After Dr. Patel left, promising to send in a nurse with pain medication, Jason filled me in on what had happened after I lost consciousness. He had physically restrained Stephanie while calling 911, all while trying to monitor my breathing. The police had arrived within minutes, finding Stephanie sitting calmly on our sofa, telling them I had attacked her in a fit of jealous rage and she had merely defended herself. They didn't believe her for a second, Jason said grimly. The marks on your neck, the bruising pattern, it was all consistent with someone standing behind you, pulling a cord. Not to mention my statement about what I walked in on. Stephanie had been arrested and taken to the county jail, but was released the following morning after our parents posted bail. This news sent a chill through me that had nothing to do with the hospital's aggressive air conditioning. She's out? I managed to whisper, each word like swallowing needles. There's a temporary restraining order, Jason assured me. She can't come within 500 feet of you or contact you in any way. A soft knock at the door drew our attention. My parents stood awkwardly in the doorway, my mother's eyes red-rimmed, my father's face ashen. The sight of them, the people who should have protected me but had instead enabled my tormentor, filled me with a confused mixture of longing and anger. Cassie, my mother whispered, taking a tentative step into the room. We came as soon as we heard you were awake. Jason's posture stiffened, but he remained silent as my parents approached the bed. My father cleared his throat, looking everywhere but at the bandages around my neck. The doctors say you're going to be fine, he said, as if trying to convince himself. Fine? Jason's voice was quiet but sharp. She could have died. Your other daughter tried to kill her. We don't know exactly what happened, my mother said quickly. Stephanie says there was an argument. Things got out of hand. I saw what happened, Jason cut her off. I walked in and saw Stephanie strangling Cassandra with an extension cord. There was no argument, no self-defense. It was attempted murder. My father's face hardened. This is a family matter. We need to handle it privately, not involve courts and police. Finding my voice despite the pain, I whispered, she tried to kill me. The room fell silent. My mother's hand flew to her mouth, tears spilling down her cheeks. My father looked at me directly for the first time, seeing the bruises that extended beyond the bandages, the raw abrasions where I had clawed at my own skin trying to loosen the cord. Stephanie needs help, my mother finally said. She's been under terrible pressure. The medical board review, the issues with her residency program. She hasn't been herself. She's always been herself, I countered, each word a painful effort. You just never wanted to see it. Before my parents could respond, Two police officers appeared at the door, introducing themselves as Detectives Morgan and Russo. They asked to speak with me alone, and after a moment of hesitation, my parents and Jason stepped out into the hallway. The interview was exhausting but necessary. I whispered my way through a detailed account of what had happened, from the party to the moment Stephanie had attacked me. Detective Morgan recorded my statement while Detective Russo took notes, occasionally asking clarifying questions. They explained that they had already interviewed Jason and several party guests who had noticed Stephanie's behavior throughout the evening. The district attorney will be charging your sister with attempted murder in the first degree, Detective Russo explained. Given the evidence and witness statements, including your fiancé's, we have a strong case. However, you should be prepared. Her lawyer will likely pursue a mental health defense. After the detectives left, a hospital social worker arrived to discuss the restraining order and help me fill out a formal victim statement. She also provided information about victim advocacy services and therapy options specialized in family violence. Many people find it particularly difficult to process violence from a family member, she explained gently. The betrayal aspect compounds the trauma. That evening, as Jason stepped out to get some dinner from the cafeteria, my phone lit up with a text from an unknown number. This isn't over. You've ruined everything. Again. Though I couldn't prove it was Stephanie, I knew with certainty it was. I showed the message to the nurse, who called the detectives. They confirmed it came from a disposable phone but promised to investigate it as a violation of the restraining order. The following days brought new challenges. I was discharged from the hospital with prescriptions for pain management and anti-inflammatory medications. Returning home was unexpectedly traumatic. Walking into the kitchen where the attack had occurred triggered a panic attack so severe that Jason had to call my newly assigned therapist for an emergency phone session. Physical recovery proved difficult. Swallowing remained painful, forcing me to subsist on liquid nutrition supplements and soft foods. Speaking more than a few sentences left me exhausted and hoarse. The bruising around my neck turned from angry purple to sickly yellow-green, a visible reminder I couldn't escape each time I passed a mirror. Sleep came fitfully, interrupted by nightmares where I felt the cord tightening again. Only in these dreams, Jason didn't arrive in time. The psychological impact was equally challenging. I jumped at unexpected sounds. Being alone in the house became impossible. Jason arranged to work remotely for several weeks, and when he absolutely had to go to the office, my friend from work stayed with me. The therapist diagnosed acute stress disorder, warning it could develop into PTSD without proper treatment. Throughout this period, my parents called daily, their messages a discordant mixture of concern for my health and pleas to drop the charges against Stephanie. She's seeing a psychiatrist now, my mother reported, as if this solved everything. He thinks she may have had a psychotic break. She doesn't even remember everything that happened. Your sister's career will be ruined if this goes to trial, my father argued during one painful phone conversation. The family name will be dragged through the mud. There must be another way to handle this. Their pressure added another layer of stress to my already fragile state. After particularly difficult calls, I would find myself shaking, unable to focus for hours afterward. 2 weeks after the attack, I made the difficult decision to limit contact with my parents until after the legal proceedings concluded. This decision coincided with a disturbing discovery. While picking up a prescription refill, I encountered my mother's longtime friend at the pharmacy, a nurse who had known our family for years. After expressing shock at my appearance, the bruises still visible despite my attempted concealment with a scarf, she mentioned something that sent a chill through me. I always worried about Stephanie's intensity, she said hesitantly. Even back when she was diagnosed, I told your mother she needed consistent treatment, not just medication. Diagnosed? I repeated, confused. With what? The woman's expression changed, realizing she had revealed something I didn't know. I'm sorry, I thought. Well, it was years ago. In high school. Your parents probably didn't want to worry you. Later that day, I called my mother's friend directly, pressing for details. Reluctantly, she explained that Stephanie had been diagnosed with a personality disorder during her junior year of high school, following an incident with a classmate who had been selected for a prestigious science internship instead of her. My parents had kept the diagnosis private, agreeing to medication, but refusing the recommended intensive therapy, concerned about how it might affect Stephanie's college applications. This revelation shattered the last remnants of my familial trust. My parents had known Stephanie was potentially dangerous, yet had done nothing to protect me or ensure she received proper treatment. Instead, they had hidden the diagnosis and continued to enable her increasingly erratic behavior. With this knowledge, I made two decisive moves. First, I formally pressed charges, refusing the plea deal Stephanie's attorney had proposed that would have reduced the charge to aggravated assault. Second, I filed for a permanent restraining order, ensuring that regardless of the criminal case outcome, Stephanie would be legally required to stay away from me. The district attorney, Lauren Mitchell, was supportive of my decision. "The evidence is compelling," she assured me during our meeting in her office. "The premeditation aspect is particularly clear given your sister's pattern of behavior and the nature of the attack." As the preliminary hearing approached, I steeled myself for the reality that I would soon have to face Stephanie in court. The prospect filled me with dread, but also determination. For the first time in my life, I would not allow myself to be victimized by my sister or by the family dynamics that had protected her at my expense. The county courthouse was an imposing limestone structure in downtown Minneapolis, its grand steps leading to heavy wooden doors that seemed designed to intimidate. I paused at the entrance, my hand instinctively rising to adjust the silk scarf covering the still visible bruises on my neck. 8 weeks had passed since the attack, yet the physical evidence remained, a fact the prosecutor had noted would work in our favor during the proceedings. "Ready?" Jason squeezed my hand, his steady presence the foundation I'd leaned on throughout this ordeal. I nodded, not trusting my voice. Though much improved, my speech still sometimes faltered when I was stressed, a lingering effect of the trauma to my vocal cords. Inside, we met Lauren Mitchell, the assistant district attorney handling my case. In her early 40s with prematurely silver hair and sharp green eyes, she exuded competence and calm determination. "The arraignment is fairly straightforward," she explained as we sat in a small conference room. "The judge will read the charges, your sister will enter her plea, and bail conditions will be reviewed. You won't need to speak today." When we entered the courtroom, my eyes immediately found Stephanie sitting at the defense table. She was dressed conservatively in a navy blue suit, her hair pulled back in a modest ponytail, looking every bit the promising young doctor rather than someone charged with attempted murder. Beside her sat her attorney, Harrison Wells, a prominent defense lawyer whose services I knew our parents must be paying for. My parents were seated directly behind Stephanie, my mother's hand resting protectively on her shoulder. Neither looked in my direction as Jason and I took seats behind the prosecutor's table. The message was clear, they had chosen their side. Judge Williams, a stern-faced woman with reading glasses perched on the end of her nose, called the court to order. Case number 47285, State of Minnesota versus Stephanie Reynolds. Charges: attempted murder in the first degree. What followed was a blur of legal formalities. Stephanie pleaded not guilty, her voice soft but clear. Her attorney immediately launched into a request for reduced bail and the removal of certain restrictions, arguing that my sister was a respected medical professional with community ties who posed no flight risk or danger. Lauren countered forcefully, "Your Honor, the defendant violated the temporary restraining order within 24 hours of her initial release by contacting the victim via text message from an untraceable phone. This demonstrates both a disregard for court orders and an ongoing threat to the victim." Judge Williams denied the defense's requests, maintaining the existing bail conditions and reinforcing the restraining order terms. As the proceedings concluded, I risked a glance at Stephanie. She was staring directly at me, her expression a disquieting mixture of hurt and hatred that sent a chill down my spine. In the weeks that followed, I met regularly with Lauren to prepare for the preliminary hearing. She was candid about the challenges we faced. "Your sister has no prior criminal record. She's educated, respected in her field. Her attorney will paint you as the jealous sibling who finally pushed her to a breaking point. But Jason saw what happened, I protested. There are the hospital records, the photos. All compelling evidence, Lauren agreed. But Harrison Wells is known for creating reasonable doubt where none should exist. We need to be prepared for him to attack your character, your relationship history with your sister, even your mental health. She wasn't wrong. As discovery proceeded, we learned that Stephanie had provided her attorney with a lifetime of carefully curated grievances against me, childhood incidents reframed to cast me as manipulative and attention-seeking, emails and texts taken out of context, even statements from family friends who recalled my supposed jealousy of my accomplished sister. Most disturbingly, Wells filed a motion to include my therapy records, arguing that I had a history of anxiety and depression that colored my perception of events. Lauren successfully fought this invasion of privacy, but the attempt itself was a painful reminder of how far Stephanie was willing to go. The most shocking development came during a routine evidence review. Lauren called me to her office on a rainy Tuesday afternoon, her expression grimmer than usual. The police executed a search warrant on your sister's apartment and electronic devices, she explained, sliding a folder across her desk. They found these. Inside were printouts of internet searches from Stephanie's laptop, dating back nearly 3 weeks before the attack. How to strangle someone efficiently? Can you kill someone with a cord? How long does it take to die from strangulation? How to make murder look like self-defense? My hand trembled as I closed the folder. She planned it, I whispered. All along, she planned it. Lauren nodded soberly. This transforms our case. These searches demolish any claim of temporary insanity or heat-of-the-moment action. She researched methods, anticipated defenses, and then deliberately created a situation where she could get you alone. The evidence of premeditation led to a significant turning point in the case. Stephanie's attorney approached Lauren with a plea offer. His client would plead guilty to aggravated assault in exchange for a reduced sentence of 5 to 7 years, with possibility of parole after 3. Lauren presented the offer without recommendation. This would guarantee some jail time and spare you the stress of a trial. But the decision is yours, Cassandra. You're the victim here. I didn't need time to consider. No deal. She tried to kill me, and she planned it for weeks. I want her held accountable for what she actually did, not some watered-down version. My parents were horrified by my decision. My father called that evening, his voice tight with anger. Do you have any idea what you're doing to this family? To your sister's future? What about my future, Dad? I challenged, my hand unconsciously rising to my throat where I could still feel phantom pressure some nights. What about the fact that I almost didn't have one because Stephanie decided to kill me? She wasn't trying to kill you, he insisted. She was having a breakdown. If you'd just accept the plea deal, she could get treatment instead of prison. This trial will destroy all of us. She had years to get treatment, I countered. You and Mom knew about her diagnosis in high school and did nothing. You enabled her, made excuses, and now you want me to do the same. I won't. The conversation ended with my father's warning that I might not recognize the consequences of my choices until it was too late. My mother's subsequent calls were emotional appeals rather than logical arguments, tearfully asking how I could do this to my only sister. Their pressure only strengthened my resolve. With each preparation session, each deposition, I found my voice, literally and figuratively. My therapist noted the change, observing that standing up for myself against Stephanie was allowing me to reclaim personal power I'd surrendered throughout my life. Jason remained my steadfast supporter, accompanying me to every meeting, helping me work through the legal terminology, holding me through the nightmares that still occasionally plagued me. We postponed our wedding plans by mutual agreement, deciding that healing and justice needed to come first. 2 days before the preliminary hearing, Stephanie's attorney filed a flurry of motions to suppress the internet search evidence, denied, to change venues due to pretrial publicity, denied, and most desperately, to have the judge reconsider the plea offer, also denied. The morning of the hearing arrived with a strange sense of calm. I dressed carefully in a conservative blue dress, arranging my hair to partially cover the faint but still visible marks on my neck. As Jason and I approached the courthouse, a small crowd of reporters had gathered. The case of a doctor attempting to murder her sister had attracted considerable local media attention. Inside the courtroom, I took my seat behind Lauren, consciously avoiding looking at the defense table. When the bailiff called "All rise," I stood with newfound steadiness, ready to finally speak my truth. The main courtroom of the Hennepin County Courthouse felt cavernous, its high ceilings and wood-paneled walls designed to inspire awe and respect for the legal process. Morning light filtered through tall windows, creating dramatic shadows as Judge Williams took her place at the bench. The gallery behind me was filled with journalists, law students, and curious members of the public. The case of a promising young doctor charged with attempting to murder her sister had captured the community's attention. At the prosecution table, Lauren Mitchell arranged her notes methodically, her posture conveying quiet confidence. Across the aisle, Harrison Wells whispered urgently to Stephanie, who sat with perfect posture, hands folded demurely on the table before her. She wore a conservative gray dress with a high neckline, her hair pulled back in a simple bun, looking every inch the wrongfully accused professional. My parents had taken seats directly behind her, my mother clutching a handkerchief, my father's face set in grim determination. They didn't look my way as I entered with Jason, though several other relatives nodded in solemn acknowledgement. The family had fractured along fault lines that had always existed, but had now broken open irreparably. After preliminary motions and administrative matters, it was time for opening statements. Lauren approached the jury box with measured steps, making eye contact with each of the 12 people who would decide Stephanie's fate. "This case," she began, "is about more than a family disagreement gone wrong. The evidence will show that the defendant, Stephanie Reynolds, meticulously planned and then attempted to murder her sister, Cassandra. You will see internet searches demonstrating premeditation. You will hear expert testimony about the injuries Cassandra sustained, injuries consistent only with an intentional act of strangulation. And you will hear from an eyewitness who interrupted the attack, quite literally saving Cassandra's life." She went on to outline the prosecution's case clearly and concisely, promising evidence that would remove any reasonable doubt about Stephanie's intentions and actions. When Harrison Wells rose for the defense's opening, his approach was markedly different, emotional, almost theatrical. "What the prosecution has described as attempted murder," he said, pacing slowly before the jury, "was in reality a tragic moment between two sisters with a complicated history. Stephanie Reynolds is a dedicated healer, a psychiatry resident who has devoted her life to helping others. Yes, on that unfortunate evening, there was an altercation. But what you will learn is that this incident occurred in the context of years of competitive dynamics, provocation, and misunderstandings." He painted a picture of Stephanie as the real victim, overworked, under tremendous professional pressure, and allegedly goaded into a momentary loss of control by years of supposed slights and provocations from me. His narrative was so skillfully constructed that I found myself momentarily questioning my own memories before the physical pain in my still-healing throat anchored me back to reality. The trial proceeded with the prosecution's case. Lauren called first responders who testified about the scene they encountered, me unconscious and in respiratory distress, visible ligature marks around my neck, Jason restraining a belligerent Stephanie. The emergency room doctor described my condition upon arrival, noting the severity of the injuries and the interventions required to stabilize me. Jason's testimony came next, his voice steady as he recounted walking into the kitchen to find Stephanie standing behind me, pulling an extension cord tight around my neck as I struggled weakly. Under Wells' cross-examination, he remained unshakable, refusing to accept characterizations of the incident as mutual combat or a scuffle that got out of hand. "There was nothing mutual about it," Jason stated firmly. "Cassandra was being strangled from behind. She was losing consciousness when I entered. If I had arrived even 30 seconds later, she likely would have died." When it was my turn to testify, I approached the witness stand with trepidation but determination. After being sworn in, I faced the courtroom, deliberately meeting Stephanie's gaze for the first time since the attack. Her expression remained impassive, almost clinical in its detachment. Lauren guided me through my testimony methodically. I described our childhood dynamics, the pattern of Stephanie's behavior over the years, and the events of the housewarming party in detail. When I reached the moment of the attack, my voice faltered despite weeks of preparation. She said I didn't deserve any of it, my home, my career, my fiancé, I recalled. Then she grabbed the extension cord from the counter. I didn't realize what was happening until I felt it around my neck. She pulled it tight, yanking backward. I couldn't breathe, couldn't call for help. I tried to get my fingers under the cord, but she just pulled harder. What did you hear her say as this was happening? Lauren asked. She said, always taking what should be mine, I answered, the words sending a fresh chill through me even months later. Wells' cross-examination was as brutal as Lauren had warned it would be. He questioned my perception of childhood events, suggested I had always been jealous of Stephanie's achievements, and implied that I had somehow provoked the attack through years of passive-aggressive competition. Isn't it true, he asked with feigned sympathy, that you've always resented your sister's success? That you've constructed a narrative of victimhood to compensate for your own insecurities? No, I replied firmly. I wanted a normal, healthy relationship with my sister. What I resented wasn't her success, it was her need to diminish me to feel successful herself. The cross-examination continued for hours, Wells attempting to create inconsistencies in my testimony, to paint me as unreliable and vindictive. Through it all, I held on to the truth of what had happened, refusing to be gaslight in yet another arena of my life. The turning point in the trial came on the fourth day, when Lauren called Dr. Raymond Chin, a forensic radiologist specializing in strangulation injuries. After establishing his credentials, including over 20 years of experience and dozens of peer-reviewed publications, Dr. Chin was shown the X-rays and CT scans taken during my hospital stay. These images tell a very specific story, Dr. Chin explained, using a laser pointer to indicate areas on the enlarged X-rays displayed on screens visible to the jury. The pattern of trauma to the trachea and cervical vertebrae is consistent with what we call a ligature strangulation from behind with sustained force. He went on to explain in precise, clinical detail how the angles of compression and resulting injuries could only have occurred if someone standing behind me had pulled a cord-like object with significant force for an extended period. Could these injuries have resulted from a brief altercation or a momentary loss of control? Lauren asked. Absolutely not, Dr. Chin replied definitively. The depth of tissue damage and the particular pattern of vascular compression we see here requires sustained application of force for at least 60 to 90 seconds. This was not a momentary action. As Dr. Chen's testimony continued, detailing the mechanisms of strangulation and explaining how my injuries demonstrated clear intent, I noticed a change in the courtroom atmosphere. Jurors who had seemed impassive during earlier testimony now leaned forward, some taking detailed notes. Several glanced at Stephanie with newly appraising eyes. Lauren displayed a particularly disturbing image, a three-dimensional reconstruction of my cervical vertebrae showing the compression pattern. And this damage here, she asked, indicating a particularly dark area. What does this represent? That's an area where the force was so significant it nearly fractured the vertebrae, Dr. Chin explained. In my professional opinion, this degree of force exceeds what would be necessary to render someone unconscious. It approaches the level of force needed to cause death. For the first time since the trial began, I saw Stephanie's composure crack. As the X-ray images remained displayed on the screen, her face paled visibly, and she whispered something urgently to her attorney. Wells' cross-examination of Dr. Chin was notably brief and ineffective. He attempted to suggest alternative explanations for the injury patterns, but each time, Dr. Chin calmly refuted his hypotheticals with scientific precision. The prosecution's case continued with digital forensic experts presenting the damning internet searches found on Stephanie's devices. The jury saw screenshots of her queries about strangulation methods, timestamps showing the searches began weeks before the attack, and browser history revealing she had viewed multiple articles about how to make murder appear as self-defense. When the prosecution rested its case, The defense began by calling character witnesses, colleagues from Stephanie's residency program, former professors, even our childhood piano teacher, all testifying to her dedication, intelligence, and apparent gentleness. None, however, could speak to the private dynamic between us or explain away the physical evidence and internet searches. My parents testified reluctantly, called by the defense. They walked a careful line, expressing shock at what had happened while attempting to paint our childhood as normal and loving. Under cross-examination, however, my mother was forced to acknowledge that Stephanie had been diagnosed with a personality disorder in high school and that they had opted for minimal treatment to avoid disrupting her college applications. "We thought she had outgrown those issues," my mother said tearfully. "She seemed so successful, so in control." In a surprising move, Stephanie herself took the stand, against her attorney's visible reluctance. Dressed in a simple blue blouse, her hair loose around her shoulders, she presented herself as contrite and confused. "I never meant to hurt Cassandra," she testified, her voice breaking appropriately. "We had an argument. She said things, hurtful things about my failures in medical school, about how I would never measure up to her success. I just snapped. I don't even remember picking up the cord. It was like watching someone else use my hands." Wells led her through a carefully constructed narrative of temporary insanity, of pressure and stress culminating in a momentary break from reality. It might have been convincing if not for what happened during Lauren's cross-examination. "Dr. Reynolds," Lauren began, using Stephanie's professional title with subtle irony, "you've testified that you snapped in a moment of emotional distress. How do you explain the internet searches about strangulation methods found on your laptop, dating back 3 weeks before the incident?" Stephanie's expression flickered briefly before she composed herself. "I was doing research for a paper on suicidal ideation among medical professionals. It's a serious issue in our field. Yet none of these searches appeared in any research document on your computer," Lauren countered. "And many specifically referenced murder, not suicide." As Lauren methodically dismantled Stephanie's narrative, the prosecutor walked to the evidence table and picked up a large envelope. "Your Honor, I'd like to display People's Exhibit 27 again." With the judge's permission, the most damning X-ray image reappeared on the courtroom screens, the three-dimensional reconstruction showing the near fracture of my vertebrae. Lauren approached the witness stand, placing a printed copy directly in front of Stephanie. "Dr. Reynolds, as a medical professional, you understand what this image represents, don't you? The force required to cause this kind of damage." Stephanie stared at the image, her composure crumbling visibly. To everyone's surprise, including apparently her own attorneys, tears began streaming down her face. "I just wanted her to stop," Stephanie whispered, no longer performing, but seemingly speaking from some long-buried place of truth. "She always had everything so easy. Everyone loved her. Even our parents started preferring her. Everything I worked for, she got without trying. I just wanted her to know how it felt to struggle for once." A hush fell over the courtroom. Wells half rose from his seat, clearly intending to ask for a recess, but before he could speak, Stephanie continued, her voice gaining strength. "I didn't plan to kill her. I just wanted to hurt her, to scare her. But then, when I had the cord around her neck, something changed. I wanted her to stop existing. Just for a little while. Just so I could breathe." She looked up, meeting my eyes across the courtroom. "I'm a doctor. I knew exactly how long it would take, how much pressure to apply. I knew what I was doing." The courtroom erupted in murmurs. Judge Williams banged her gavel, calling for order. Wells managed to get a recess called, but the damage was irreparable. Stephanie's unplanned confession had confirmed every element of the prosecution's case. When court reconvened the following morning, Wells attempted to salvage what he could, calling a psychiatrist who testified about the effects of extreme stress and childhood trauma on behavior. But the expert's assertions rang hollow in light of Stephanie's own words and the physical evidence. After closing arguments, the jury deliberated for just under 5 hours before returning with their verdict. As we all stood, I felt Jason's hand steady on my back, grounding me for whatever came next. On the charge of attempted murder in the first degree, We find the defendant, Stephanie Reynolds, guilty. The words hung in the air for a moment before the courtroom reaction drowned them out. Through the noise, I watched Stephanie being handcuffed, her eyes fixed on some middle distance, her face oddly peaceful now that the pretense had fallen away. 3 weeks after the verdict, I returned to the Hennepin County Courthouse for Stephanie's sentencing hearing. The intervening time had passed in a strange limbo, relief at the guilty verdict mixed with apprehension about the final resolution and what would come after. Though my physical injuries had largely healed, leaving only faint scarring around my neck, the emotional landscape remained complicated and raw. The courtroom was less crowded than during the trial, the media frenzy having subsided to a steady simmer rather than a full boil. My parents sat stiffly in the front row behind the defense table, both looking years older than they had just months before. They nodded tersely in my direction, but made no move to approach as Jason and I took our seats behind Lauren. Judge Williams entered, and the proceedings began with the formalities of the sentencing phase. After hearing arguments from both attorneys regarding appropriate penalties, the judge asked if I wished to make a victim impact statement. I had prepared for this moment extensively with my therapist, crafting words that would express my truth without being consumed by anger. As I approached the podium, I caught my first close look at Stephanie since her confession. Dressed in standard-issue jail clothing rather than her carefully selected court attire, she seemed smaller somehow, her confident posture replaced by a subtle hunching of her shoulders. When our eyes met briefly, I saw neither hatred nor remorse, but something more complex, a flicker of recognition, perhaps, or resignation. "Your Honor," I began, my voice steady and clear in the hushed courtroom, "I stand before you today as someone who has spent a lifetime being erased. From childhood, I was taught that my feelings, my achievements, even my safety were secondary to my sister's needs and ambitions. What happened that night wasn't an isolated incident or a momentary lapse. It was the culmination of years of escalating behavior that everyone around us chose not to see." I continued, detailing not just the physical trauma of the attack, but the psychological impact of lifelong manipulation and gaslighting. The bruises have faded, but I still wake up some nights feeling the cord around my neck, fighting for breath. I still flinch at unexpected movements. I lost not just my sense of safety, but my entire family structure, parents who chose to protect their image rather than their daughters, extended family who preferred comfortable denial to uncomfortable truth. Looking directly at Stephanie, I said, "I don't hate my sister. I recognize now that she has been ill for a very long time, and that illness went untreated because it served a family narrative that was easier than reality. But understanding is not the same as excusing. Stephanie made calculated choices, researched methods, and acted with intent. Her actions deserve consequences, not just for justice in my case, but for her own chance at eventually finding a healthier path." I concluded by addressing the judge directly. "I'm asking for a sentence that reflects the severity and premeditation of this crime, but also mandates the psychiatric treatment that my sister has needed for years. I want accountability, but I also want to break a family cycle that has damaged all of us." When I returned to my seat, Jason squeezed my hand, his eyes reflecting the pride I felt in having finally spoken my complete truth in that courthouse. My statement had not been about vengeance, but about clarity, naming what had happened not just on the night of the attack, but throughout our shared history. Judge Williams listened to final statements from both attorneys before delivering her decision. "Stephanie Reynolds, this court sentences you to 15 years in the Minnesota Correctional Facility for Women, with possibility of parole after serving 10 years. She paused, looking directly at Stephanie. "Additionally, I am ordering comprehensive psychiatric treatment throughout your incarceration, with regular evaluation reports to this court. Upon eventual release, you will serve 5 years of supervised probation with mandatory continued treatment." As Stephanie was led away by court officers, my mother wept quietly while my father stared straight ahead, his jaw clenched tightly. Neither approached me as I left the courtroom with Jason and Lauren, our steps echoing in the marble hallway. The months that followed brought their own challenges and revelations. Initially, I threw myself back into work, grateful for the structure and normalcy of my creative director role at Horizon. Jason and I finally set a wedding date, opting for a small ceremony with close friends rather than the larger family event we had once envisioned. Physical healing continued its course. The specialist who monitored my recovery pronounced me fortunate. The damage could have been far worse, and with continued therapy exercises, I would likely regain full vocal strength and range of motion in my neck. The body is remarkably resilient, she told me during our final appointment. It remembers trauma, but it also knows how to heal. The emotional healing proved more complex. My twice-weekly sessions with Dr. Marshall, a trauma specialist, helped me process not just the attack, but the lifetime of dynamics that had preceded it. We worked through my complicated feelings about Stephanie, the sister I had both loved and feared, the childhood companion and the adult who had tried to kill me. Family abuse is particularly insidious, Dr. Marshall explained during one session, because it occurs within the very system that's supposed to provide safety and nurturing. The betrayal creates a unique kind of trauma. Approximately 2 months after the sentencing, my father called unexpectedly. Our conversations since the trial had been brief and strained, focused mainly on practicalities. This time, his voice sounded different, less defensive, more subdued. "Your mother and I have been seeing a therapist," he said after an awkward greeting. "We've been trying to understand everything. How we got here." He asked if I would be willing to meet them for dinner, somewhere neutral. After discussing it with Dr. Marshall and Jason, I agreed, choosing a restaurant downtown where we had no family history. That dinner became the first of many difficult but necessary conversations. My parents had begun to recognize their role in enabling Stephanie's behavior and failing to protect me. They had found a therapist specializing in family systems who had helped them see the patterns they had perpetuated. "We didn't want to see it," my mother admitted, her hands trembling around her water glass. Stephanie was always so intense. From the time she was a toddler, everything was extreme with her, her brilliance, her rages, her jealousy. We told ourselves it was just ambition drive. We thought we were supporting her special gifts. The most shocking revelation came later in our reconciliation process. During a session with their therapist, my parents disclosed that Stephanie had been diagnosed not just with a personality disorder in high school, but specifically with antisocial personality disorder with narcissistic features. The diagnosis had come after an incident where she had deliberately sabotaged a classmate's science project by introducing a corrosive chemical that ruined weeks of work. All because the other student had been selected as lab partner to a teacher Stephanie admired. "We were terrified of the label," my father explained, his usual confidence absent. "We worried about college admissions, medical school applications." The psychiatrist recommended intensive therapy, possibly even residential treatment, but we chose medication and minimal counseling instead. We convinced ourselves it was enough. Learning that my parents had hidden such a significant diagnosis, one that explained so much of my lived experience, initially reopened wounds I thought were beginning to heal. But over time, their willingness to acknowledge their mistakes and work toward genuine change allowed for a new, more honest relationship to develop between us. 6 months after the sentencing, Jason and I were married in a garden ceremony attended by close friends and a small number of family members. My father, in a moment of unexpected emotion, apologized again just before walking me down the aisle. "I failed you," he said simply. "I'm trying to do better now." Our honeymoon in Costa Rica provided a much-needed respite from the emotional intensity of the past year. Upon our return, I made a decision that surprised even me. I wanted to visit Stephanie in prison. Dr. Marshall helped me prepare for the visit, ensuring I had clear boundaries and realistic expectations. "This isn't about forgiveness or reconciliation," she cautioned. "It's about closure and your own healing process. Whatever happens, remember that you're doing this for yourself, not for Stephanie." The Women's Correctional Facility was a stark, utilitarian complex of beige buildings surrounded by chain-link fence. After being processed through security, I was escorted to a visitation room where Stephanie waited, seated at a metal table. Her hair was pulled back in a simple ponytail, her face devoid of makeup. She looked simultaneously younger and older than her 31 years. Our conversation was awkward at first, filled with the strange formality of two people who shared a lifetime of history but had become strangers. Gradually, however, Stephanie began to speak about her treatment program. "I'm on the right medication now," she said, her voice lacking its former sharp edges. "I have group therapy 3 times a week, individual sessions twice. It's the first time anyone has actually addressed the real issues instead of just trying to help me function." She didn't offer a direct apology, but near the end of our allotted time, she said something that resonated more deeply than any "I'm sorry" could have. "I always thought you had what should have been mine," she admitted, her gaze fixed on the table between us. "I couldn't see that we were both trying to survive the same broken system. I don't expect you to forgive me. I don't know if I'd forgive me. But I am trying to understand why I became what I became." I left the prison with conflicted emotions, but also a strange sense of peace. Stephanie was finally getting the treatment she had needed for decades. Our relationship would never be what siblings should have, but the toxic bond had been severed, allowing us both to begin healing in our separate ways. In the year that followed, I channeled my experience into creating an online support community for siblings of people with untreated personality disorders. What began as a small forum grew into a resource platform with thousands of members, webinars led by mental health professionals, and eventually a nonprofit organization dedicated to family education and advocacy. My professional life took an unexpected turn when I was asked to give a TEDx talk about family trauma and resilience. The 15-minute presentation, titled "The Shadows We Survive," went viral, leading to speaking engagements at universities and mental health conferences. While maintaining my role at Horizon, I began writing a book combining research on family systems with personal narratives of survival and healing. Jason and I bought a new house, a fresh start without traumatic memories, and began discussing starting a family of our own. The question of inherited mental health conditions naturally arose, leading to genetic counseling and thoughtful conversations about how we would parent differently than the patterns we had both experienced. Today, as I reflect on the journey of the past 2 years, I recognize that healing isn't a destination but a continuing process. There are still days when the trauma resurfaces unexpectedly. A sound, a smell, a casual touch to my neck can temporarily transport me back to that kitchen. But these moments have become less frequent, less overwhelming. I've learned that sometimes loving someone means maintaining firm boundaries. That family bonds can both heal and harm. That breaking generational cycles requires naming painful truths, even when others resist hearing them. Most importantly, I've learned that my voice, literally and metaphorically, deserves to be heard. If you're watching this and recognize your own family dynamics in my story, please know you're not alone. Toxic relationships often thrive in silence and isolation. Reaching out to a therapist, a support group, a trusted friend can be the first step toward breaking patterns that may have existed for generations. The path isn't easy, but it leads to a freedom that those trapped in cycles of abuse and enablement can barely imagine. Thank you for listening to my story. If it resonated with you, please subscribe to this channel and share it with someone who might need to hear that healing is possible. Leave a comment about your own experience with family dynamics or healing journey. Your words might be exactly what another viewer needs to read today. And remember, the most important relationship you'll ever have is with yourself. Make it one of compassion, honesty, and unwavering self-advocacy. Until next time, this is Cassandra Reynolds, wishing you peace and healing on your own journey.